Hello, hello. This is the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. If you have a story to share, you can do so over at www.letstalkneardeath.com. This is where we explore all of the mysteries that surround death, dying, and what becomes in between. Today, we're going to step into one of the most extraordinary, puzzling, and emotionally powerful end of life phenomena. We're going to be talking about terminal lucidity. Actually, it's got quite a few different names. It's also known as rallying, terminal rallying, the surge. I like that one. It's like a surge of energy right at the end. Pre-mortem clarity. It's quite an interesting one as well. It's got a lot of different names. And it's where someone who's near death, this could be in the months or usually in the final days or final hours, but it can be as long as in the months. Someone who maybe hasn't been so responsive becomes very alert. They will speak, sometimes with really deep insight, and they start to recognize people, they say goodbye. They often share very important words right before they leave this life. And today we're going to hear through some stories from caregivers and families and some of the things that science can explain, but also some of the things that it can't. So let's start at the beginning. What is terminal lucidity? So terminal lucidity is a sudden, spontaneous return of mental clarity shortly before death. It's really often in individuals with severe neurological conditions. So that might be something like dementia or a brain injury, psychiatric illness, or it may be in someone who has been in a coma for a long time, someone who hasn't been responsive. And they will suddenly come about and have amazing clarity, understand the world around them, understand what's happening, who's there. They'll be completely coherent and they will start to speak and understand what is happening in that room. There's a similar phenomenon. I hope I've said that right. That's quite a hard word to say, isn't it? Anyway, called paradoxal lucidity. And this is where the same thing happens, where the person regains clarity, but doesn't necessarily die a short time afterwards. That's a slightly different topic. Today, we're going to be focusing on terminal lucidity. We're going to have some real life stories. We're going to have a little bit of discussion around this. And I think actually what I'll do is I'll start off with my own experience of terminal lucidity. I was with my grandmother. We were living in the UK at the time, so I lived away from her separately in a separate town. I just happened to be there at the time. She was very, very unwell and had been in the hospital and hadn't been very responsive. My father got the phone call. Now, he was in New Zealand. I was living in the UK. He got the phone call to come and say goodbye, that she was very close to dying. And I know many of you have had that phone call, and it's really quite something. So, as you imagine, he jumped on a plane. He got the first flight over to the UK. We were in London, my husband and we drove up to her town in the north, took my father with us, and we got to the hospital, and she suddenly became really alert. She was there. She knew exactly who my father was, which surprised us all. She knew who we were, my husband and I. She understood everything in that room. And we were thinking, oh, great, she's going to be okay. She's got a little bit longer. And I think my father was almost thinking, well, I came over here, but actually she's okay. And we spent, it wasn't terribly, probably about 45 minutes, I think. This was quite a few years ago. So I think it was about 45 minutes we spent with her. She was hungry. And of course, us being her family were like, let's get her some food. So we started to ask the nurses and they asked the doctors, and everybody kept saying she can't eat. And we were thinking, oh, come on, if she eats, she'll get her energy, she'll be able to get better, she'll heal, she'll have a little bit more time with us. So she was elderly, she was well in her 80s. And we were so upset that the hospital wouldn't let her have any food. And so we were pushing on this. And to quote her, one of the final things of words that I heard from her was, I could murder a roast veal. And that was kind of the way she spoke. She had all these little sayings that she had. That was one of the final ones. We pushed on that. The nurse in the end explained that she couldn't have food because her organs were so worn down, that she was so close to dying that they wouldn't be able to process it. She might choke on the food, she might suffocate from the food. And even if she did get it down, her body would not be able to process it. Now, this was so, so tough for us because she was so alert and so bright and sharing stories with my father. They got to have some final closure time, which was really beautiful. We got a phone call a couple of hours later that she had died, and we couldn't believe it. It just seemed so foreign to the experience that we'd had there in the room with her. And I'll never forget that. At the time, I did not know about terminal lucidity. I wasn't doing the work that I'm doing now. I just actually couldn't understand it. So I know firsthand that these things happen. And I think it was such a gift because I actually remember her so much better in those final minutes that we had with her, about that 45-minute mark, where she was alert. That's how I remember her final time, not of her being unconscious or not responding. It's quite amazing. I feel like there's a lot of love in that. And so a lot can happen in those final moments. Some real life stories, another one. So these are from the internet. I do a lot of research, I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of looking for stories. So if you have one, feel free to send it to me. Here are just a couple that I've come across. So one, I'm going to keep them anonymous. I'm going to change names where applicable. But I'll start with this one. There was a lady named Melissa, and her father had Alzheimer's. He hadn't spoken her name in 2 years. And then one morning he looked at her, he smiled, and he said, "You've always been my little star." And then he passed away that night. I can just imagine how incredible those words were for her as some of his final words. There's another one, the singing man. One woman shared how her grandfather, who was non-verbal for months, sat up before death and he sang a wartime ballad perfectly. Then he lay down and he died peacefully. Another woman described her mother, non-verbal for over a year, opening her eyes and saying, "There's nothing to be afraid of. Love is waiting." And she died the next morning. One daughter recalled her unresponsive mother suddenly looking up and saying, "Oh, the angels are so beautiful." And she passed just hours later. So I want to touch a little bit on the science of terminal lucidity. Some scientists propose that it's a neuroelectrical surge in the dying brain, possibly restoring temporary coherence. We hear about this a lot in near-death experiences, that there are some people that say it's just the lights from the operating table is the great white light, that the brain goes into a massive surge right before the person dies, but in a near-death experience, they don't quite die, so something happens there. There are theories that it's reduced inflammation within the brain or a final surge of adrenaline or energy. I think it's actually quite hard to get brain scans right at the point of death. It's a very interesting moment. A lot of people talk about just needing to be at peace. And if somebody dies, often there is no rush to do anything. So there was some research done by Michael Nahm and Dr. Bruce Grayson. That was in the early 2000s. I'm not actually 100% sure, but I believe they coined the term terminal lucidity. It describes something that's been happening for centuries, but actually pulling some research together has really helped to understand more about it. There is another research paper that I came across, and I will try and put the link for that down in the notes. It estimated that 43% of people who experience brief lucidity die within about 24 hours and 84% within a week. It can happen later in life. It can happen months beforehand. There are also a lot of other things that happen. People having deathbed experiences. We're going to cover that in a slightly different episode, but so much can happen in these final hours, final moments. It is not just terminal lucidity. It is not just this being absolutely aware of everything. There can be conversations with past loved ones, seeing people in the room, talking in metaphors, so many things. And I'm going to get to that in another episode. So if you have stories, don't forget to send them in to me. Send them to kirsty@letstalkneardeath.com, or you can submit over at the website. So if we tap into some of the spiritual and cultural perspectives, don't quote me on these. However, what I have found, some research actually leads me to believe that Christianity might see terminal lucidity as grace, that Buddhism views it as a soul's awakening. Hinduism suggests that it may signify readiness or liberation. There are all sorts of beliefs around this topic. It's not scientifically proven in terms of it isn't really a thing, but it is really a thing because so many people are aware of it. Hospitals are becoming more aware of it. There are many, many, many people who work in hospice who have stories of this, hospice nurses, even within our hospitals and our medical care systems. People are becoming more and more aware of this phenomena. I think it's amazing. There was the story of a Buddhist nun in Thailand who sat up after a long silence and she said, "The river flows without end, but I've reached for the shore." And she died moments later in a meditation posture. So amazing. For families and caregivers, it can be so significant. It can feel like hope. It can be a signal before death, a signal to not panic, but to be present. So if you go through this experience, I kind of wish I knew more when it happened with my grandmother, because I probably would have told her more things or asked her more things. I felt like she was going to be okay, so I didn't really make the most of the opportunity. We treated it kind of like another ordinary hospital visit, to be chatty and be available for them. But I think in hindsight, some of the things that we can offer people if they go through this experience is to express our love, to say thank you to them, to really share how we feel. And I know for some people that's not always easy. For some people, that might be a situation where there's conflict or unresolved words. So perhaps that's the space to offer forgiveness or share forgiveness together. It may be just to sit in the presence for that person, listen to what they have to say. Often what they're saying may come, I mentioned before, in metaphors, or it doesn't quite make sense. This is not the time to try and prove that anyone's right or to correct them, because we don't understand the world that they're going through right now. We don't understand that veil. I often talk about how I don't think there is a defined point of death, but we go in between different worlds and it's like a veil that gets thinner and thinner. So if they start saying things which maybe aren't quite correct or you don't understand, that's okay. Just be with them, go with it, and really just be available. Offer those expressions of love and gratitude for them, and be aware that even though it looks like they might be getting better, these may be your last moments. And don't worry, I'm quite aware that that's really tough, because if you are thinking this is the last time I have with them, it's quite hard to manage that emotionally and to also show up for them emotionally. There was a beautiful tip from someone in hospice, I can't remember who, but they said to keep a journal of any last words. I can't remember the conversations we had with my grandmother, but I know they were important. And I kind of grieve that I didn't understand the situation. Write down some words, write down any last things that they might want to say. They can often reveal deep meaning, but in hindsight. So writing down how the experience went straight afterwards, after the fact, further down the track, it might be, oh, that's why that happened, or that's why she told me that. Terminal lucidity is beautiful. It's amazing. We may never fully understand it, but I think it shows up that our self may still remain. Well, I believe it does still remain, even when it's invisible. I do believe we go on. I believe that there is something so much bigger than this life, and all of these beautiful stories really do reinforce that for me. They bring clarity and connection. If you've witnessed it, I would love to hear from you. Your story may help somebody else to navigate their own journey going through this. And maybe you want to go and do some extra research around this beautiful topic. I'm so grateful for everybody who shares their stories and for all of the people working in the situations, the nurses, the medical professionals who put in tireless hours day in, day out and enable these experiences to happen. This is Let's Talk Near Death. I'll see you next time when we continue to explore life, death, and all of the moments in between.